All right. Good evening, everybody. I'm Trustee Diane Jones, and I'd like to welcome everybody here for the meet and greet with our new superintendent, Mr. CJ Kamek, for the Irvington attendance area. It is really good to see everybody today, and I want to thank everybody who's here tonight on the panel and for all of the families and community members who are joining us. I'm really excited to see folks tonight and to engage in this conversation. I want to share with you that I know this year we're facing new and unique challenges, and it is nice and important for us all to come together as we face this difficult time together. As you know, challenges present new opportunities, so I'm hoping tonight we can focus on some of the positive things that are going on in the district as we answer some questions about the challenges. I wanted to thank the community for submitting questions that have been submitted. We probably will not, even almost assuredly, not get to all of them tonight, but we hope to touch on all the broad overarching themes that were raised by the questions. I did want to mention that I know some of the questions that I read, and I read them all, were very specific, that had to do with a specific student or a specific classroom or a very specific site issue. And for questions like that, I just want to remind community members that you can always direct those questions to teachers, probably first. They're usually the most important people and can solve most problems with you and for you. Beyond that, you can always address questions to your site principal and admin. And when the need arises, if there's something that you just can't figure out how to solve, or a question that you have that you don't know where to go to for help, you can always email me, and my address is on the district website. So I'm very happy to help community members find ways to solve the problems that they have and address the concerns that they have. So before we get started tonight, I wanted to start with some introductions. We are so grateful to have Mr. CJ Kamek joining us from Martinez Unified, where he was a superintendent for 4 years. Mr. Kamek has worked at all levels of education, from being a teacher to a principal, to a director and an assistant superintendent over his more than 20-year career in education. So I'd like to throw it to Mr. Kamek here to start us off, and you can fill in some of those blanks and introduce yourself to the community.
Thank you so much, Trustee Jones, and thanks to our administrative team for being here, and for our community for being engaged in this process as well. As Trustee Jones mentioned, I've had a wide range of experiences. I feel very blessed to have earned the position to serve the community of Fremont and Fremont Unified School District. And my pathway to Fremont is one, as was described, that took me from teaching 5th grade, which was one of the most exciting jobs I ever had, to becoming a middle school vice principal, which was definitely one of the busiest and most ever-changing jobs that I've ever had. And then I moved into the district level, then I became an elementary principal at 2 different schools and loved that work as well. And then I moved into the district office administration level, moving into student services and special education as a director. And from there, I moved into human resources and was also asked to take a position in San Ramon Valley Unified School District. And I left that school district as their assistant superintendent of human resources to go back to Martinez, where I did most of my prior work, and become their superintendent. So for the last 4 years, I served as their superintendent. And as I said earlier, I'm thrilled to be the new superintendent for Fremont. In the last 4 years of education, I felt like we had seen a number of things we hadn't really seen before, in terms of power outages, smoke days, and all kinds of new things. But 2020 had something else in store for us. And I want to extend my compliments to everybody in Fremont, and for that matter, everybody in education across the state. This has been an unparalleled time, and I have just been incredibly impressed by everything that I've seen. I would kind of close my opening remarks with the fact that I want to acknowledge and recognize that we are all people first, and part of being a person is we get called into our profession. But first and foremost, we are people. And on that level, a little bit about me personally. I'm very lucky to be married to an extremely wonderful and patient wife who is a pediatric OR nurse at Children's Hospital. And I am, as many of you are, in the distance learning role as a parent as well. I have an 8th grade student and a 5th grade student, and am working through all the trials, tribulations, and challenges that are presented with distance learning as well. So thank you very much for the chance to introduce myself, and I will pass it back to Trustee Jones as we continue through our work this evening.
Thank you so much. I'd like to go ahead and introduce everybody who's on the panel tonight. And so once I say your name, if you could unmute yourself and just introduce yourself briefly. And if at the end I've missed anybody, because I think there may be some folks on that I was not expecting and maybe missing some. So I want to make sure we introduce everybody. Not only is Superintendent Kamick new to our district, but we have a new Assistant Superintendent of Instruction this year. And I'd like to welcome Ms. Leticia Salinas to the district. Could you introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Trustee Jones and Superintendent. So yes, I also made the move. Recently, I worked in a neighboring district in Newark Unified, and before that worked in San Francisco Unified and Hayward Unified in different assistant superintendent roles, from supervision of schools, curriculum, and human resources. And I'm very, very excited to be here in Fremont. Thank you.
Great, thank you and welcome. I'd also like to introduce our Director of Elementary Education, Robin Surt.
Hi, good evening. I'm Robin Surt, as she said, the Director of Elementary Education, and I have a lot more time in Fremont than Mr. Kamick and Ms. Salinas. I have a whole year under my belt, but I'm excited to be working with a wonderful administrative team and all of our school sites.
Okay, great. And I know Mr. Zach Larson is not with us tonight, but I wanted to be sure the community heard his name and knows his position. Mr. Zach Larson is our Director of Secondary Education. So there are times when you may have questions that we direct to Mr. Larson, and I wanted to make sure you were aware of that. I'd like to welcome Irvington High School Principal Amanda Melsby.
Good evening. I'm Amanda Melsby, Principal of Irvington High School. Thank you so much for participating and for having me this evening.
Great. Thank you so much. We also have Horner Middle School Principal, Miss Cindy Hicks Rodriguez.
Hello, I'm Cindy Hicks Rodriguez, the proud principal of the brand new Horner Middle School. Someday we will get in there. We're anxious to have everybody in there. The only thing we're missing so far are the voices of the wonderful students that we have. So thank you for having me this evening.
Fantastic. We're very excited about the opening of Horner as well. We have Green Elementary Principal Trisha Johnson.
Hi, good evening, and thank you for having me. I am the principal at Harvey Green Elementary, a Fremont resident. I grew up in the schools here in Fremont, and I'm proud to be here. This is I just am finishing my 2nd year here.
Fantastic. We also have Judy Nye from Grimmer, the elementary principal there.
Hi, thank you, Trustee Jones. I'm Judy Nye. I am the proud principal of Grimmer Elementary. This is my 20th year in Fremont. I started my career here and my 11th year as principal at Grimmer. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have Hirsch Elementary Principal Christina Arroyo.
Good evening, and thank you, Trustee Jones, for the intro. My name is Christina Arroyo. I am the principal of Hirsch Elementary. We border, and we've seen every step of the way of Horner. Let's see. This is my 3rd year as the principal, and this is my 24th year with the district. And finally, I do have a daughter who has gone through Fremont Unified. She's now in her junior year at Irvington with Ms. Melsby.
Thank you. We have Leach Elementary Principal Tammy Pachote, and I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly.
It's okay. Thanks for having me. It's Tammy Pachote, and I'm also a product of Fremont Unified. I went to school here, I taught here, and now I've been the principal for the last 3.5 years at Leach Elementary. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. We have Warm Springs Elementary Principal Scott Iwata.
Good evening. Thanks for having me on this call. I'm very excited to be here. I also have 3 young boys that are in the district. So all you parents out there, I'm experiencing all of the distance learning challenges and also the breakthroughs that we're having with distance learning this year. So thanks for having me.
Wonderful. And we have Wybell Elementary Principal Annie Lee.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Annie Lee. I'm the principal at Wybell Elementary School. I started my teaching career in Fremont, and after 10 years, I became principal at Wybell, and this is my 4th year.
Wonderful. And I think, although not on my list, I see Mr. Herrera has joined us from Robertson. Mr. Herrera?
Hi, my name is Sal Herrera. I'm the principal at Robertson High School in Vista Alternative. I am now entering into my 14th year at that site. I'm a little jealous of Cindy Hicks because I was previously at Horner Junior High as a vice principal and principal for 8 years prior to that. So I'm a little jealous to have, worked in a 40-year-old school, and now she gets to work in a brand new school.
Thank you. Well, I think I got everybody. Is there anybody who I missed? Chime in now. Okay, welcome. Well, before we go ahead and get started with some of the questions that have been submitted by community members, CJ, I'd like to throw it back to you really quickly if there's anything that you would like to say before we get started with the questions.
Thanks so much, Trustee Jones. I would just want to extend my gratitude to many, many people across Fremont Unified School District, and I won't list them out individually, but my gratitude goes out to everybody who has contributed so much to make the start of this year so successful. I also want to extend my gratitude and thanks to all the individuals who have taken the time to offer me a warm and compassionate welcome to Fremont Unified School District. We are in the midst of a number of challenges, and even though we are in that process of addressing those and identifying success through those, I have continually been met with a welcoming spirit and a very open and warm embrace. And so that has been a wonderful way to start my tenure in Fremont Unified. And I just want to acknowledge all of our classified employees, our certificated employees, and our administrators who have done so much at the school sites and across the district to make the start of the year so successful. We will talk a little bit more about distance learning, but to have the start that we've had, while nothing is perfect, I've been monitoring districts across the state and our district, and I've been so impressed by the work that's happened in Fremont Unified, and I would put our program and our product and our staff up against anybody that I've seen. So a lot of gratitude extended to everybody who's a part of this district, and also to our students and parents who are engaged in a new level, whether it's from the parent-teacher role or the students who are taking on more independent responsibility than they've had to in prior years. So with that expression of gratitude, I'm happy to turn it back to you, and we'll engage in the questions.
Fantastic. I just want to echo that gratitude. I think we all knew we were going to be in for a very different year this year, and I have been really pleased to see how well it has gone. It certainly hasn't been without some bumps, but I think overall this has gone very well from my perspective and the feedback that I'm hearing from the community. So the first overall topic we're going to tackle tonight is distance learning. And I'm not sure who might like to chime in first, but just overall, how is distance learning going so far? And maybe if we start with somebody from the elementary side and then move into the secondary, because I think those may be a little bit different. So anybody from elementary who'd like to give an overview of how distance learning is going so far for you?
Sure, I'll share. So far, I would say distance learning has been, like you were saying, Trustee Jones, a lot. I feel it's gone probably a lot better than I would imagine when we were just kind of administrating, getting everything set up. So it for sure has had its challenges, but the teaching staff and what I've heard, which is other teachers, have just been doing a phenomenal job of really, because they have to do something they've never done before. They have to prepare lessons like they're all first-year teachers, and they've all have stepped up to the plate and really have done just an incredible job. It's really inspiring to see them and all the work that they're putting into just to deliver the best and possible education under these circumstances. So far, and we're only 1 month in, so I keep telling my staff, we got to pace ourselves. make sure that you're taking your wellness breaks, you're taking breaks, because on that screen, it's really exhausting, not only for the students, but also for the teachers, because they're on there all day. But overall, I've just seen incredible things happening, almost as good as being in person with some of the classrooms that I've visited, some of the projects that the kids are collaborating on and presenting, just all in Zoom. And the teachers are doing a great job with a lot of grace, even though they're having so many issues. I mean, if you go into these rooms and you see the technology that drops out, the sounds, the microphones go off, a kid disappears. But with all that, they're just doing a great job so far, and I think they'll keep it up. And I'm just feel very fortunate to be in this district and to also be at the school that I'm at with the staff that's just working so hard to make this the best experience for our community.
Thank you. That's really great to hear. Is there anybody from secondary who'd like to share some of what's happening with this learning so far?
I can go ahead and share. It was interesting. We ran an attendance report for our distance learning, and our attendance rate is at 99.5. At first, we honestly thought it was an error. And then we thought, well, that's where they have to go during the day, is to school. So it was wonderful. But we've been so impressed at Horner. We have seen a major uptick in creativity just using the different platforms that our teachers have been using. Mm-hmm. And I think for us, one of the coolest things that we have experienced is we have had some flipped classrooms without even realizing it, because multiple times we have had students take on a teacher role to teach us how to get back on Zoom, how to actually use that format on Nearpod, how to use this specific device. And it has been extremely invigorating. The kids, the parents, when we have been reaching out to them for engagement, have been phenomenal. They've been extremely receptive, very much a team setting. And so just the fact that we've been placed into the situation that we've been placed into, with having to talk through a screen, for the 6-hour day or what have you, we are more than impressed with what's been going on. And our hope is that once we do return in person, whenever that is, that the same level of creativity and the same use of those platforms will happen, because just having conversations with teachers and hearing their excitement about learning new things and participating in new ventures, it's amazing. It's actually been very, very good. Very good.
Great, thank you. Amanda Melsby, do you have anything to share about what's happening in Irvington?
Yes, thank you so much. I too, as the others have said, have been so impressed with our teachers. They have really learned a new way to teach. And I think many of them, as Scott said, feel like they are new teachers, but they are taking obviously all of their experience and background. They're revamping and reconfiguring their lessons, and they and the students are really working together. The students have had such grace and kindness toward the teachers as well, as they've learned the new platforms and as tech issues have occurred with everyone. And so I think one lesson that really has come out of this is just even more so, the extension of kindness and the extension of grace that everyone has toward one another during this time. The academics, I think most of our teachers would say that they feel that they can present the content, they can make sure that their students are up to par with that content. Their concern is making sure that they are building those relationships with our students and building that community and really working hard and more mindful within the setting that we're in to obtain that goal.
Thank you so much. I think, I've heard the same things that you're seeing, is that there's been a lot of grace and patience that we've all extended to each other during this challenging time. But it's nice to hear that so much is going well. I want to share a little bit. Are there places or people that families can go to when they need assistance or help with something? I'm not sure, Superintendent Kamick, if you'd like to give kind of an overview of kind of where parents and families can go if they have questions or problems.
Yes, absolutely. I think if there's questions or concerns, one of the first places I would always encourage individuals to go is to the classroom teacher. And beyond that, I then would encourage people to reach out to their site administrator, their site principal. And most of the challenges can be addressed at that level, whether they're technical, whether it's a device need. The site administrators can really point everybody in the right direction and address most of the concerns that are coming up. And I also think that just as a general practice, as a former 5th grade teacher myself, it was always very helpful when parents that had a concern in my classroom were able to come to me. So I would encourage people to do that. And then I would also say that there's a lot of things that happen in terms of distance learning for students and families. And if there's a desire for that somebody needs to talk with someone, if they feel like they might need a counselor or some support, also, again, I would encourage them to reach out to their site administrator who can put them in contact with somebody. If it's a student or a parent at the secondary level, they may have a more direct contact with some of our great counselors for our secondary schools, and that would be an appropriate contact as well. So I would encourage people to take a look at those resources as a means of support and utilize those areas.
Excellent, thank you. Did anybody else have any tips for parents who need help or support before we hop on to the next question?
I'll say something here. As Mr. Kamek said, our teachers are the first line of support, but our elementary counselors have done an amazing job being in touch with families to offer support. They're sending virtual classrooms out with all kinds of resources. They've also, tonight, this afternoon, our counselor did a meeting with her 2 schools that she represents for parents. She sent out a survey, she got the survey results, and she centered her topic around what the parents really needed. I have a community liaison at our school, I'm fortunate to have, and parents are reaching out to her. So I think we're all just kind of communicating with one another probably more regularly than we ever have in the past to make sure that our families have what they need.
Right, and I'm a parent in the Washington attendance area, and I'd just like to share that I've been getting a lot of email communication from the site administrator and the counseling team there. And I want to encourage parents and families to really take a look at the messages that are coming from your school. I know sometimes our inboxes fill up and we delete things or scroll right past, but really there's a lot of great information in the messages that are coming from our administrators and our counselors and our teachers right now. So I encourage you really, take the time to scroll, to at least open and skim what's in those messages. Sometimes it's really important. I'd like to now move on to a slightly different topic. How are the needs of our special ed students being met in distance learning? Would anybody like to jump in with that question?
I can start, Diane, with that question.
Sure, thank you.
Sure. Horner, of course, is an inclusion school in Fremont, and we're blessed to have that program at our site. I give major kudos to our paraeducators who are not only pushing into their special education classes, but they're also pushing into our general education classes. This year at Horner, we have piloted a program with our incoming 6th graders where all of our special education program is a push-in program whereby we travel with the students to the classrooms, and our paraeducators have been privately meeting and scheduling Zoom meetings with the general education teacher to pre-plan lessons, talk about what was upcoming in the next lesson so that they could be of support to the students. And I give major kudos to our program specialists and our inclusion specialists in the district who have consistently been in contact with our general education teachers, the administrative team, and including parents in the process also to ensure that we are meeting the needs of the special education students. So speaking from my campus and having the inclusion program there, we have been blessed, and it has really been a team dynamic in supporting our special ed students.
Great, thank you so much. Superintendent Kamek, do you have any information to share with all of us about how we are serving our special ed students?
Thank you. I would echo the comments that we just heard. I have been wildly impressed with the work of our paraprofessionals across the district. And I think we also have to recognize that that scope looks very different from preschool to secondary schools to our students that are of transition age, 18 to 22. And as we go through the distance learning model, each individual student, whether general ed or special ed, has some unique needs. And as we have special education students that may have more intensive needs, uh, those can oftentimes, it can be challenging to meet those really well in a digital format. But despite those challenges, I've been very impressed with our teachers, our service providers, who are doing everything they can to try and meet the needs of our students across the district. And I think that we all look forward to that opportunity when we can return to a comprehensive in-person learning environment for every student in the district. But for some of our students with unique needs, certainly we are looking forward to that day as well.
Thank you so much. I think we're gonna hop now to the next overall topic here with school reopenings. And I know this is a big topic, and there are a lot of smaller questions under here. But Superintendent Kamik, what can you share with us about reopening right now?
Thank you. And as some of you may have already read in my community and staff newsletter, there's a lot of developments that are taking place right now across the Bay Area, across the state, and within Alameda County related to considerations for a return to in-person instruction. The biggest development is that Alameda County has recently moved into the red tier in the tiered system. And within that red tier, I think it's important to recognize a few things. One of them is that schools are permitted under the state guidelines to reopen for in-person instruction if the county stays in the red tier for 14 days. However, it does not stipulate that schools have to return for in-person instruction. And I know that there are members of our community, students and staff members who have various feelings about this very important topic. And I know some people would like to see students back in class right away. I know some people have a different viewpoint that it's not yet time to return to in-person instruction. Being within the red tier, what is also important to recognize is that Alameda County Public Health still has the authority to set more restrictive guidelines or restrictions within how schools operate. And even though we're in the red tier right now, I anticipate that Alameda County Health will publish a new health order in the next few days, likely by the end of this week, I would imagine. And that new health order will probably provide additional guidance in terms of what Alameda County Health is setting forward as expectations and guidance for a return to in-person instruction. One of the things that I think is also critically important to recognize is that the guidance that we've talked about since the beginning of summer or at the end of the last school year, some of that has stayed the same and some of that has changed. So when we talk about a return to in-person instruction, we are still talking about face coverings, physical distancing, screening, proper PPE, and most importantly, I think it's very key to highlight that as you see different schools or districts consider a return to in-person instruction, they are incorporating a hybrid schedule where students are broken into smaller groups and they're not all able to attend school at the same time because most classrooms within the state are about 950 square feet. And when we take into account physical distancing, we need to break our classrooms into smaller cohorts. And so that has some implications as well related to how much time students are actually receiving in-person instruction compared to a more traditional learning environment. And lastly, I think one of the things that is also a significant development is that within Alameda County, if a school district were to seek a waiver for instruction in TK through 6th grade, which is required if the county moves back to the purple tier, Alameda County has set forward a requirement, and I believe that the state may move in this direction, but it hasn't been identified yet. But right now there's a requirement within Alameda County that school districts must have a signed agreement with an organization to provide asymptomatic testing for all employees at a rate of 50% of the employees each month, meaning every 2 weeks, 25% of our employees would have to go through COVID-19 testing, even when they're asymptomatic. And not only is that a significant development in terms of logistics and operations, it's also a significant fiscal development, which is certainly something that we have to pay attention to. And that is something that districts across the state are paying attention to as well. So those are some of the things that are on the forefront of my mind. Other things that exist in the conversation right now is, one, I want to recognize that there's been a lot of work and input from the community and task force groups before I got here. So I recognize that it's not necessarily reinventing everything, but I also want to recognize that whatever we are considering for a future discussion, we have to be careful that it is not something that sets up our staff, our students, or our community for a constant fluctuation of being in person and distance learning, and being in person and back to distance learning, because that is remarkably disruptive for students. And again, it is remarkably challenging for teachers to make that adjustment. So we want to be very thoughtful about how we approach this. And right now, our next conversation about this will be taking place at a November Board of Education meeting.
Yes, I'm glad you raised some of those issues, Mr. Kamek, because the testing issue is something that we've been discussing in some other meetings that I've been on with trustees in Alameda County and Contra Costa County and the Alameda County Department of Public Health. And that is a real challenge for us, because when we talk about any sort of mandates or recommendations to do testing, that is an expense for the district, and it's not as if the county or the state is providing us with those funds. So we may come to a point where we feel like we would all like to reopen, but there may be some financial challenges that we face that make that difficult. So, testing is just one of those examples, but there are significant costs that come with reopening when we want to do so safely. And I want to reassure the community that as a trustee, and I think what you've seen from our board, is a real desire to prioritize safety. And as Superintendent Kamek mentioned, we don't want to see a situation where we are coming back and forth, because as disruptive as distance learning is for our students, we know that going back and forth from distance learning to hybrid is even more disruptive. I wanted to touch on one other thing, because you mentioned cohorts, Superintendent Kamek, is that will there likely, if we are able to come back, will there be a difference between how we return for elementary versus secondary, given the challenges of cohorting with those two different groups?
Yeah, that is a great question, Trustee Jones. And the recommendations and the guidance from the health agencies at the local and state level are to pay very close attention to those group settings. And as you can imagine, when we're talking about an elementary school, we are able to have a bit better control over those cohorts. And by control, I mean, we already, for the most part, have elementary students assigned to one teacher, even though it's recognized that we have specialists who support the instructional environment for our elementary students, but they are not switching classes in the same manner that our secondary students are. And so when we talk about secondary students, that is an introduction of a lot of community engagement within that school population as students move from one class to the next class. And if they're doing that, depending on the schedule, 3 to 6 times a day, depending on what type of secondary schedule exists, that starts to introduce a lot of interaction. And when we have those circumstances in place, it is even more important to make sure that all of our safety protocols are there, that our screening protocols are there, and the safety piece really is first and foremost. And as we've seen, we're seeing an increase in cases amongst children, and we recognize that that is in part because some schools are reopening, and with any virus, we would expect to see that. But I also think it's very important to understand that we have to be very careful as we approach this traditional flu season. We're in the red tier now, but it's unknown what exactly is going to happen with the spread of the virus as we move into the traditional flu season. And that's something that we certainly want to monitor very closely. And I think the younger cohort stability factor is why even at the county levels, they have engaged in the process of potentially allowing waivers for TK through 6th. And I think as you see a lot of discussions happen around a return to in-person instruction, there's a lot of consideration for prioritizing our youngest students. And then in addition to that, our students who may have unique needs across the district. Trustee Jones, I think you might still be muted.
Sorry about that. Here we go. So I think Superintendent Kamick touched on a lot of the sub questions that were under this broad category of school reopenings, but if there's anybody who would like to add any more information or share any concerns about school reopening, I'd be happy to take that now. Okay, so we're gonna hop over to the next overarching theme here, which is budget. And I know we just touched upon that a bit when it comes to some of the costs that we might incur with reopening. But overall, how is COVID-19 affecting our budget?
That's also a great question. And unfortunately, COVID-19 is impacting our budget a great deal. And I could probably have a 2.5-hour workshop on school funding, but since we don't have that time tonight, I'll try and keep the summary of that brief. But ultimately, the way the funding models work within the state of California under LCFF, the local control funding formula, and within Prop 98, we really are dependent as a public school system on the economy of California. And when the economy of California is really strong, school districts do better. I won't say that they do well because I believe there are some fundamental flaws in our funding model across the state of California. But when the economy is strong, we do better. When the economy is not doing well in the state of California, there is an unfortunate burden that is placed on the backs of public school districts. And we are feeling that right now. And I believe we will continue to feel that into the future. There was a prediction in the spring that we would be seeing a 10 to 15% reduction in our funding for this year. The governor's budget actually did not enact that reduction, and it gave us more of what would be identified as flat funding. But we recognize that our costs don't remain flat. Our costs continue to increase, and so that creates an intense strain on our budget. And that's not unique to Fremont Unified. One of the things that is more directly connected to Fremont Unified as an individual characteristic is that we are in a continued pattern of declining enrollment. And any district that is in a declining enrollment pattern, they will see a negative outcome in their revenue source as well. And so those are some of the things that we're facing. And based on those conditions, we have passed a resolution at the board level that identifies the need to make roughly $11 million in reductions from our 21-22 budget. And what that means is these are decisions that would need to be made in this spring that would affect the next school year. And we've also identified, based on our current projections, that we will likely need to cut another $16 million in the 22-23 school year. So that total of $27 million over the next 2 consecutive school years is a significant amount of budget adjustments that need to take place, either through reductions or through revenue enhancements. And there are some things on the ballot this year that could contribute to revenue enhancements. But without further revenue enhancements, those are the targets that we have for potential reductions. And when you have an organization, and this is true for most school districts across the state of California, 85 to 89% of the expenses for every school district are their personnel, because we are a people business delivering the best product we can for our students. So when we have that outcome, when we talk about these level of reductions, it's very difficult to keep them out of the schools and protect all our programs. And so we will go through some very difficult work this year in terms of trying to identify budget balancing decisions And I know our board is committed and our administrators are committed to engaging in a collaborative process. And so as we move through the next few months, we'll be engaging our labor partners, we'll be engaging our community, and we'll be engaging different groups within Fremont Unified so that we can hear as many voices as possible and gather as many ideas as possible, because I certainly believe that the collective power of our intelligence and problem solving is much stronger than any individual thinking and problem solving. So that's a little bit about where we are in the budget, and we will have to see how long the impacts of the economic downturn continue to impact the statewide revenues, because we are, for lack of a better outcome, we are directly tied to the ebb and flow of the state revenue.
Right. I'm glad you talked about some of the challenges that we're facing, not because I'm glad we're facing them, but because I think we want to be transparent with the community and our stakeholders. And just to remind the community, not only are we facing 11 million in cuts for next year and 16 million for the following year, but this is now on top of, the board had identified 22 million in revenue enhancement. We call them budget adjustments, revenue enhancements and cuts for this school year. And the prior year, we had enacted 16 million in budget balancing solutions. And that's on top of tens of millions that had occurred 2 years prior. So we're in a pattern of budget cuts. And as you make these cuts, of course, every year, as you cut what you think is, an extra thing, you get to a point now where we're really going to be looking at core things. And if you look at our district, we are really incredibly lean. Our student to administrator ratio is incredibly high. Our student to district level staff ratio is incredibly high. The amount that we spend per student on books and supplies is incredibly low. So this district really has done a lot of trimming already. So we're really going to need the community's help as we move forward, because what's left on the table for us to look at in terms of reductions are essential services, are things that we all feel are important, or at least someone in the community feels is important. And it's going to impact the services we provide to our students, unfortunately. So we want to make sure we have as much engagement as possible as we move through this difficult period of identifying how we are going to keep our budget balanced moving forward. And I'm glad you also mentioned declining enrollment. I think that's something that's shocking to our community, as for the last decade, we've seen growth that exceeded even projections. And to find ourselves now in our third year of declining enrollment is something that I think came as a shock to our community, and the way that it impacts our budget is serious. Having spoken to trustees in districts who have been in declining enrollment for a while, this is definitely a challenge we're going to be facing. I know we probably want to move on to another topic, because I know this is going to be taken up with some more community engagement meetings that Superintendent Kamick mentioned. But if there is anybody else who would like to say anything about our budget situation before we move on, I would welcome that. Okay, so I think we'll go ahead and we'll move on to the next topic, which is curriculum. And there has certainly been a lot of talk in the district and really statewide and nationally about equity and about issues related to ethnic studies and making our curriculum more inclusive. And I'm wondering if you can share anything with the community about how we're addressing equity in instruction.
Thank you. I would love to turn it to our Assistant Superintendent, Ms. Leticia Salinas, who can help address some of those topics. And then also maybe after that, hand it to some of our site administrators who can talk about the equity work that they're engaged in at their school sites. Ms. Salinas?
Yes, thank you. And I'm going to turn my camera off. My Wi-Fi is acting up, so I'll see if that helps. Thank you. Certainly, Trustee Jones, you're correct. I think the wonderful thing about Fremont Unified, as I share with the board, is that we are certainly a district committed to equity and continuous improvement. So on October 14th, the district will be bringing forward to the board an augmentation of our equity team, because we know that it is important to add more voices, certainly our student voices, and just to really have more folks at the table to really do this deep and wonderful work that we need to really build on. But I can share that, we're doing some other work parallel to that. And so in fact, quite recently, some of our principals are involved with this, and certainly our secondary schools, around core novels and supplemental novels at the secondary. So a lot of work has started around looking at the canon. What do our students get to read in their English classes? And so what we're looking at is augmenting it with more American literature, with more authors of color, and certainly more representation of what California is, what Fremont is. And so I really appreciate, I know Trustee Jones, you were on one of the committees the other day as a group of teachers and administrators started to look at that work. So I do want to share that as a district, we're moving forward with this deep equity work. Tomorrow, when we do our all principals meeting, I'm going to be sharing an opportunity with all of our principals to start to embark on partnering with Stanford and looking to see how we can bring forward some of our experts around the Bay Area and to really build on the equity work that has started in Fremont.
And then I can just build from that. Zach Larson, our Director Larson, and I are working with the principals on some professional development and book clubs and really digging deeper into the equity work. And so we're working at the district level with our site administration and really focusing our work on equity and justice and the shifting mindset in education. In addition, at the elementary level, we are embarking on PBIS with our school sites. We have a 7-year rollout plan because it does take a number of years to get through 29 schools. But we did start with our 7 elementary schools this year. If people aren't familiar with PBIS, it's Positive Behavior Intervention System. And it's really shifting the mindset and the support for social emotional learning and having that multi-tiered system of support for students with the social emotional support. And it goes alongside and complements the work we do with our academic multi-tiered system of support. So we have a lot of work going on with our administration, as well as looking at shifting some of our practices.
I can go ahead and add a little bit too, Ms. Jones. So just to kind of echo, I think that, equity and social justice has been a topic discussed throughout our district over the last few years. Specifically at my site, we've been working with Circle Up. We've had a contract with Circle Up for the past 4 years. They did some extensive training on racism, discrimination, bias, and microaggressions with my staff over the last few years. This year, they're going to be working with my leadership class and with a focus on equity and social justice. Our leadership class every year through Circle Up has also been trained in restorative practices. We include our student in that process. Kids that come to my school have not had great experiences in education, and it's kind of a fresh start. And we want to make sure that we have, every resource available to help them move forward and obviously pass the finish line and graduate. One of the other things we've been fortunate with is we have offered and we have staffed an ethnic studies class, and the outcomes during that class, there's a different lens. I mean, there's a curriculum, but our teacher is very special, and she's added a ton of information through a lens of thinking critically about race and class, ethnicity, and gender. She wants students to be able to understand how unique history shapes perspectives, and then the value the diverse experiences of others. So she brings these kids through a process that they're able to experience some things that they haven't specifically experienced in a more formal setting. So we're very proud of that work that we're doing at our school with our kids, and again, including everybody in the process, whatever that may be, whether it be instructionally, the budget, just involving all stakeholders in that has been a focal point at our school.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Herrera. I really, Robertson is really a gem in our district. And I had the privilege of visiting last year when we were able to do site visits. And it was incredible, some of what was happening at Robertson, that I really would like to find ways for us to expand into the district as a whole. And, hopefully we will have opportunities to do that in the future. But the work that you all do is incredible. For anybody who wasn't aware of some of the student forums that have been happening throughout the district that started in the summer and have gone through to early this fall, our students have done an incredible job at each of our high schools. They held student forums that engaged students and staff and admin. And some of the discussions that they have brought to us have been so critical. And those conversations were so thoughtful and productive. And that, I think, has lit a fire under all of us to move forward with some of the work that they're asking for us to do. And it's just a testament to the students that we have here in Fremont. And for those of you who haven't maybe seen those, I believe that they are on, that those forums are posted on the high school YouTube channels that are run by the students. So people have access to watch those, and I really encourage folks to do so. Just doing a time check here, we're at 6:54. And so I'd like for us to kind of, as we wind down, think about some of the positives. I know it's easy to get bogged down in the challenges that we're facing with distance learning. It's easy for us to think we can't wait to get back in the classroom, and I know that is still true, but with challenges come opportunities. And I know there are some things that we are all learning here with distance learning. And we're seeing some things that maybe we thought were impossible that all of a sudden we realize are possible. And so I'd like for us to share a little bit about anything that you see happening now that you hope we might be able to continue once we return to in-person instruction. And I'll give a quick example. For me as a trustee, it's really important to have open, transparent community engagement and make accessibility to board meetings easier for people. And we have been accepting written public comment for our board meetings that becomes part of the public record, that I think is a great practice that we can continue, because we don't want to limit our public input to only those folks who can show up to a board meeting and stay till 11 o'clock, sometimes after midnight. And that's a perfect thing that we can probably continue to do. So does anybody have anything that they would like to share that has been a positive about distance learning that we maybe would like to continue?
I have something. Our communication with parents, our partnership with parents has strengthened tremendously through this process. And I think we need to give our parents a great deal of respect for what they're doing in their homes, especially with the youngest of our children, and how they're partnering with their teachers and working together to make sure that the learning is not lost. And I would love to see that strong partnership continue when we go back.
I would like to also add, more than ever, I think as educators, we've been challenged. As students, families, we've been challenged. And I'm going to echo some of the things that Cindy and Amanda and I think Scott earlier had mentioned. You talk about thinking outside the box, and you talk about how creative people have become. And, you get some folks like me that have been around for years. We all got teachers on our site that have been around for years. These folks are working their butt off. They are doing things that, you're going, wow. You talk about a growth mindset. You talk about really thinking outside the box and figuring out ways to make it happen. I mean, that has been the most impressive thing that I've, been able to witness. And, it's going up and down the board. It's, It's with our aides, it's with our attendance clerks, our office staff, you know, teachers. But I'll tell you, teachers are working a lot harder. And I'm not saying they've never worked hard, but let me tell you something. They are burnt out at the end of the day. We all do temperature checks with our staff, and you know, you want to listen. And it's, I think somebody mentioned it earlier about pacing yourself. I'll tell you what, we need to kind of get to that happy medium, but at the same time, how awesome is it to see folks thinking outside the box and making things happen? It's incredible.
I would go ahead, please.
I would also like to, go ahead, Ms. Melsby.
Go ahead.
I would also just like to say that, you know, in some of our special education classes, Hirsch has a severe for our medically fragile students, and we have never had higher attendance. They are logging on, they're able to participate, and what makes us feel so happy about that is it's in the safety of their home. And oftentimes they're just, you know, if it's flu season, like we're saying, they have to stay home because we don't want them to be exposed to extra germs. And so just having those opportunities, and I have to tell you, I have been in a breakout room where I was just a participant with a second grade class, and to see those second graders interacting with their peers and dialoguing and making sure that everybody participated, it was fantastic.
And I was just going to add from maybe a school-wide perspective, I think we talk a lot about trying to make sure that parents are involved and that the community is involved in the school, particularly at the secondary level. And we've really had the opportunity to rethink what involvement means. And does that mean having parents come down physically to the school right at dinner time when they're getting home from work, they have dinner to prepare, they have maybe other children in the home? Or can involvement mean things like this, where they are participating via Zoom or they're watching online presentations? I think being able to rethink that will allow us to increase the parent participation more and have our families more involved in the future.
Great,
I would
fantastic.
What I was
Go ahead,
gonna say
please.
is I echo all those comments, and I think one of the things that is a highlight for me is it was touched upon by another administrator, but it's the attendance, and not necessarily just the percentage of attendance. I think it's remarkable that we are, as a district, over 99% of an attendance rate, and that doesn't happen without classified staff, teachers, administrators, everybody focused on trying to make sure that our students are accessing the educational program. And so the attendance is important, but more important than that is the access piece. And I think that has been a highlighted conversation for communities and for districts across the state. It's certainly been a conversation for us here in Fremont. And I think as we transition back to in-person instruction at some point in the future, that continued conversation about access and equity as it relates to our educational program is something that we certainly want to keep carrying forward. And another highlight for me, and I have to acknowledge that I don't have the historical context for how much this was discussed in Fremont before I arrived. And I'm not suggesting that it's only being discussed because I'm here. It's being discussed because of the environment that we are in. But the constant conversation about wellness and mental health is, I think, a remarkable part of the conversation that has to continue to move forward. It was mentioned earlier that our staff started this year out with such great things, but that happens when everybody starts in a sprint, and this is a marathon. And I think, as we heard, we have to adjust our pace to one that's manageable, and I think we have to, for our students and for our staff, think about that wellness and mental health approach, and for our students as well. I know for every family, it's putting a strain on families that wasn't there before. And so I would encourage all of us to continue carrying forward that grace and empathy for each other. I had the privilege of being reading to a first grade classroom this year at Matos, and what an experience to watch those first graders interact on Zoom. and how much more empathy we have for the teachers who are managing that virtual classroom, for the families who are supporting that learning, and for the students who are learning an entirely new way of receiving and engaging in their learning. So I hope that focus on access carries forward, that focus on equity, and that overall focus on wellness. Because if we have learned anything in the past 9 months, it's that this world could do with a lot more empathy. And there's plenty of examples of that just within the last 48 hours in our world.
Yes, thank you so much, Superintendent Kamek. I know we've come to the end of our hour, and I know there are probably still a lot of questions that folks have. And again, I want to encourage the community to reach out to your teachers and your admins. If you have questions, they're the best source of information that you have. If you still have problems that you need help figuring out how to navigate, I'm happy to help with that. You know, we are learning and adjusting together this year as we face local, state, national, and even global challenges. And we don't get through these problems unless we work together as a community to do that. And that's really what I've seen our community do in the last month and earlier than that even, but as we've gotten into this first month of school. And I want to see us continuing with that, where we are supporting each other and making sure that we're also taking care of ourselves. So I want to thank everybody on behalf of the board for all of you being here and participating. And I would like to ask Superintendent Kamek, do you have anything else to add before we log off for the evening?
The only thing I would add is a thanks to you, Trustee Jones, for being our host and facilitator and navigating us through this conversation. And in addition to that, I thank you for your continued commitment and service to our community as a whole and to our school district, and for all the work that you do as a member of our Board of Education.
Well, thank you so much. That's very nice to hear. One other thing that just occurred to me before we sign off is that every attendance area is having one of these meet and greets, and they are going to be posted for people to view. And so there may be topics that have come up in other meet and greet sessions that you might be interested in, and you're certainly free to watch those. I know I watched the one from American last night, and there were some topics that came up there that we didn't touch on tonight here that may be of interest to people. And I encourage you to take advantage of watching the additional forums if there was something that you were hoping would be touched on that we didn't touch on tonight. So again, thank you all on behalf of the board. And I'm just so grateful to be part of such a vibrant community and the FUSD community that has really come together and risen to the challenge to deliver an excellent education for our students this year in really challenging times. So thank you all. And I think that is it for the evening.